Hello, everybody. It's been a while. You've probably noticed. I have not been very diligent about maintaining this channel, but I have plans in the new year to be a lot more aggressive in recording videos and putting them out. And we're going to start today with our first video, which of the year, which is just a ranking of the books I read in 2025. I read a whopping 26 books in 2025, which is good for me. Uh, I know other booktubers read a lot more, such as life. My goal this year is to up my reading quite a bit. But this last year I read about or exactly 26 books. Also had some DNFs, 6 or 7 that I didn't get through, but I'm not going to rank those. Instead, I'm going to be looking at these books in order and just kind of talk about my year in reading. So without further ado, this list is in reverse order. Bear in mind that even if I didn't like a book, that's a matter of taste, and all these authors worked very hard to create enjoyable fictional works. Writing a book is very difficult. We shouldn't softball our opinions on what works and doesn't work for us because that's not very fair or interesting. Criticism, I think, should be constrained to the text. I think we need this disclaimer because, in my opinion, in recent years, online criticism and fandoms have gotten a little cruel and entitled, and I really dislike that trend. I think it's fine to discuss your opinions on something, but a lot of people have gotten very personal and mean with authors, especially in the media space. But starting to leak into the book space as well, and that's just not my favorite trend in media, to be honest. But that's all I have to say. From that, let's move on and talk about our books. Well, something had to be last, and it's going to be, unfortunately, Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson's book 5 of the Stormlight Archive had some pretty bad reviews overall, I think, this year. I think some people liked it, but a lot of people really struggled with this book. And I tend to agree with the critics' perspective, even if I think the tone has been a little off in discussing this book in the public, especially on Reddit, where people got very, very angry about it. Um, for me, this book was about 300 pages too long, lost a little bit of tonal control in the dialogue, especially, and really kind of got lost in its own sauce. It's a lot of world building, a lot of backstory, and I didn't really think it all cohered into a very compelling story. Now, this flashback has leaked into his entire body of work with some fans who are like, oh, I don't like Sanderson anymore because he wrote a bad book. I think that's very unfortunate. I think some of the personal attacks on Sanderson online have been pretty unfortunate. Look, nobody writes a good book every time out, not even a prolific author like Sanderson. There's very, very few authors you can look at their body of work and been like, every one of these works is a classic. And most of the authors put out like a book every 3 to 4 years, not 2 to 3 books a year like Sanderson does. So I've talked before. I really dislike the culture of entitlement that has come around dealing with authors like Sanderson, where there are people feel entitled to 2 or 3 great books every year. That's just not how the creative process works. Some of them are going to be hits, some of them are going to be misses. I do think this toxicity has been a pretty big problem, but unfortunately, it doesn't save my opinion on this particular book as being the worst of the year for me. Number 25, The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. Um, Unfortunately, I don't get the hype on this one. I really don't. It's universally beloved. It just won the Spiffbo Tournament of Champions, and this book really didn't work for me. And I don't know. I see the things that other people see in it. I think the mother's journey is touching and heartbreaking. I think the battle scenes in this book are well drafted. But this is a pretty small part of the book overall, and the rest of the book has a lot of structural problems. I don't like the opening main character, the son, very much. It's sort of YA adjacent slogging. There's a lot of info dumps in the first 100 pages. There's sort of manufactured conflicts that don't really go anywhere. Um, and one of the big problems I have with this book is we're expected to really care about the fate of this culture that the characters are part of. That's sort of under attack by external forces. But the culture's so problematic. And the book knows this. The book's not hiding from the problematic nature of the culture. But it was very hard for me to care what happened in the meta war storyline in this book because this whole culture was basically built around misogyny, and I just didn't find it that compelling. Um, I wasn't really rooting for them to win in those long battle sequences, and that sort of robbed those sequences of their fun. There's other problems later in the book as well. I don't want to get into full spoiler territory, but unfortunately, this is just a miss for me. And I know I'm in the vast minority on this particular book. I think most people really like this book, but um, you know, my reaction is my reaction, unfortunately. Number 24, Dust of Dreams by Stephen Erickson, Book 9 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Malazan, I always forget. Whatever. I love Malazan. We'll be hearing about it more later in this list. I really, really enjoy this series. I love Stephen Erickson as a writer. But this is the weakest book of the series for me, and I had some problems with it as well. One of the big ones being that it just doesn't really stand on its own. It's kind of part one of a two-book series with the Crippled God. And this book doesn't really work without the Crippled God. And it made it a little bit of a slog at times to get through. The other problem I had with it is that, like it's so bleak. Malazan is bleak across the board, but this book's so bleak that I felt like this one tipped over into nihilism a little bit, and it wasn't super enjoyable to read because of that. Look, Erickson's craft is here. His writing is great. His prose is great. It's imaginative. It's deep. It's all the things that I normally like about Malazan. But it doesn't have that heart that some of the other Malazan books have that I really enjoy. Number 23, Stormfront by Jim Butcher, Book 1 of the Dresden Files. I decided to dip my toe into Dresden, and it was pretty much what I expected. It was a light read, very voicey, in not a great way. I don't really like voicey books, with some exceptions, but it was very popular writing style in like the 2000s and 2010s especially, and I prefer characters to be in prose to be a little bit more straightforward and a little less like quippy teenager Joss Whedon style. The bigger problem with this book is just Dresden is so misogynistic in it. It's so hard to get through some parts of it. He wasn't misogynistic in the way I expected. I thought he was going to be very chauvinist from the way other people reviewed this series, but he kind of was just like a proto-incel. He was very awkward around women. He didn't really understand women. He kind of reduced them to their bodies a lot. He did the whole like women are so mysterious, how could you ever understand them thing all the time. It was just a lot of stuff that dated poorly, in my opinion. I didn't hate this book, but there are much better books coming up. Number 22, The Thief Who Pulled on Trouble's Braid. I forgot to write this author's name down. I'm sorry. It's another Spifba book. You can look it up. Michael McClung, I think was his name. I'm sorry. I should have looked that up. I'll probably put it in the cards when I edit this. But, this is number 22, but I liked this book. I thought it was good. Tells you all you need to know about my year in reading. It was a great year for me. It was very fun. It was very breezy. But it didn't add up to much. It was just kind of an adventure fantasy story. And so it was hard to put it above some books ahead of it on the list that had a little bit more depth to them. Also, this book was very voicey, but it actually mostly worked here. I think the main character's voice was very strong, even though it was in a register that I normally kind of bounce off of. My main gripe with the voiciness is that every character spoke in that same sort of like teenage girl, sassy voice, even if they were like an old god or a crime lord. And I think that sort of undermined some of the characterization of some of these characters. But, what can you do? This was the trend when this book was written. It is what it is. Obviously, other people respond to it. Number 21, Pilgrim, a Medieval Horror. I, again, forgot to write the guy's name down. Sorry. But this was a bit off the radar, but the algorithm kept pitching it to me, and the cover was cool, and the concept was cool. So I thought I'd give it a shot because I wanted a Halloween book at the time that all this was happening. This is about a team of medieval crusaders returning home to Europe and getting sucked into a portal to some version of hell through a sandstorm. It's very gothic, very horrific, monstrous, grounded in history and religion, and pretty interesting read. I think the reason it's lower on the list than some of the others is It was a little long for the high concept. I think it could have been 100 pages shorter and been a stronger book. And it meandered a little bit towards the middle and the end, kind of related problems. It also had a lot of curse words, which again doesn't bother me. I have no problem with harsh language, but it felt a little immature and middle school esque in the way it, used those curse words. Like I'm not going to repeat them here for YouTube algorithm reasons, but it felt a little bit like the author was like, "Ha, nobody can stop me from swearing in this book, so I'm going to do it all the time," which didn't work great for me. It got a little grating. But overall, I thought this was a good book. Number 20 is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This, I think, started the year as being kind of a disappointment for me. When I finished it, I was a little let down. But it's grown a bit on reflection, and I'm interested in continuing to read from this author and this series. It won the Hugo last year. It was a huge book. Lots of people praising it. Kind of a mystery set with like ancient gods and leviathans and things like that in a fungal infested kingdom, or empire, republic. I don't remember exactly what the government structure was. I had really high hopes for this book. It didn't quite cohere for me. I didn't get super invested in the mystery. Anna, the savant character, who is sort of like the Sherlock Holmes of this book, frankly solved things a little too cleanly at times, which sort of robbed it of its like intrigue. The main character had a character arc that felt a little bit like the author felt like the character needed a character arc, but didn't really know what to do with it, and it was just felt a little tacked on. I've already forgotten what that arc is. I think it has something to do with like being able to read. It wasn't that interesting. It didn't feel organic to me. But it was clever, clean prose. It was super atmospheric, which I think is what a lot of people really responded to. And, I'm a little tepid on it, but only because I went in with sky-high expectations. Number 19, Small Miracles. Another Spiffbo book. I really enjoyed this. I'd love to have a higher, but it's just the year is the year. Fallen angels tempt British mortals with minor peccadilloes. Chocolate, mostly. The stakes were a little slightly higher from there, but this is a very, very cozy book. Very cozy, like a warm sweater of a book. And I think cozy fiction is having its moment. I think that's pretty neat. I think fantasy takes all types, and I'm glad that there's a lot of different registers and modes of fantasy these days. The only reason it's not higher on the list to me is it felt extremely derivative of Good Omens, almost like the same book at times. I liked this more than Good Omens, so it was an improvement, but it was also derivative. I could bump it a few spots, but I think I'm pretty happy with where it is on the list. It's interesting to like talk about a book that is like derivative of another book, but also an improvement on that book. But it did feel like it sort of undermined the book a little bit, how derivative it was of Good Omens. Number 18, Murder at Spindle Manor. This is another Spiffbo book. This one did a little worse in the Tournament of Champions than the other ones that I read this year, which is too bad because I liked it a lot. It's kind of an Agatha Christie fantasy novel, group of ne'er-do-wells, some weird stuff happening, some magic, some kookiness. I really enjoyed it. I was more engaged by the mystery here than I was with Tainted Cup. The main critique that people have, I agree with. Like, the characters are pretty undersketched. That's a little bit of a problem in a genre that really lives and dies with its zany casts. Murder mysteries really depend on having this, like, very memorable collection of suspects. And the suspects here were just, fine. I got them mixed up sometimes, which is not what you want. That does hold the book back a little bit, but I still had a great time with it. I still really enjoyed the read. I found it very charming, and I'd love to keep reading the series. A Memory Called Empire. Another Hugo winner this one from a few years back. I thought it was a very solid book. Great world building, very interesting culture that was created, reasonably engaging plot. It was just a little cerebral for my tastes. It didn't quite hit me at that emotional gut level. I thought the main character got a little flat at times, and some of the cultural world building was like very heady, very abstract. But these are pretty vague criticisms. Sci-fi is always pretty heady, so that's all fine. Um, but I still really like this book. I thought it was really well written and really interesting, and I'm happy to move on and read the second part at some point. But we're starting to tip into books that don't have these sort of critiques that sort of like hold them back, and start getting into the books where I'm just like, yeah, I just liked everything. And that brings us to number 16, Gideon the Ninth, Tamsin Muir. I really thought I'd bounce off this book. It's very voicey. Its reputation is it's too voicey. A lot of people don't like the voice in this book. But it wasn't quite as voicey as I expected. It wasn't quite as insanely, like sassy as I thought it was going to be going in. And I actually really related to the voice. I thought the voice really fit the character. And I thought the other characters didn't have the same tone. Like I thought the characters were all tonally different, which sort of like salvages of one very voicey character. And what's left after that is just a very interesting puzzle box of a mystery, really good world building, necromancers in space. Like what's not to like about that? The characters were all very memorable, and I really want to keep going with this series. Number 15, Empire of Silence. This is my main project for 2026. I want to get through the Sun Eater saga. I had a little bit of mixed feelings on this book, but it was very good. The character is quite memorable, Hadrian Marlowe, which he needs to be because we're trapped in his head for the entire series, I understand. Certainly the entire book. The world building is superb and like hints at more. I cannot wait to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into this world. The universe is really thought out. It's deep. It's detailed. This is one of the better world building series already that I've seen in a long time. I think my concerns with this book going forward is like the philosophy and overall arc of the story. Like it tells you on the first page, like the story is about how this main character was driven to commit genocide against an alien race by destroying their sun, hence why it's Sun Eater. And I have qualms about that direction a little bit. I'm a little worried how that's going to play out on the page going forward. But I haven't heard people really criticize how it's dealt with, so I'm hoping it's mature and well thought out. The other thing that kind of holds me back a little bit with this book is it's sort of in this tweener space. It's like in this uncanny valley between literary fantasy and adventure fantasy. The prose is striving for literary, but isn't really getting there for me. So it's just kind of like I can see what the intent of the writing is, but it's not quite working. And it's not failing, but it's just close enough to what it wants to do that I feel that difference in that friction of like what it's striving for and what it's accomplishing when I'm reading it. And the story itself is kind of just adventure novel, things happen to this character who sort of like goes through these series of silly adventures, which again, like the book feels like it wants to be literary, but the plot doesn't quite scaffold to that level yet. So it's kind of this weird hybrid space where it feels like it's not quite doing the things it wants to do yet. And I hear that gets better as the series goes on, so I'm really excited to read. Like this series wants to be Dune for sure. It's not quite Dune. I mean, I haven't read much of Dune, but like what I have read of Dune is a little more advanced than this is so far. But it wants to be Dune, and I think it has the opportunity as the books go on, from what I understand from what other people have reviewed, to kind of get into that space. So I'm very curious about the series. It is my main series goal of this year, to get through the Sun Eater project, the Sun Eater series rather. Number 14, Scythe. This is a book my sister recommended for me, and I enjoyed it a lot. It's young adult. I don't normally read much young adult, but I don't hate young adult. I've enjoyed some of the young adult I've read over the years. And I thought this book had some interesting ideas and themes. It's a world without natural death. Priests called scythes call the population. A couple kids are sort of recruited into the order and have to deal with that. It explores themes of mortality, how death gives life meaning, how power structures corrupt themselves naturally, even when well intended. It had kind of what felt like a little bit of a naively libertarian philosophy, which I struggled with at times. But the story itself was very compelling. The twists were good. The characters were well sketched. The plot was very engaging. Just a solid book. Like, I really enjoyed this one. Number 13, Orconomics. I was very surprised by this book. It was more than I expected. It was pitched as a sort of Pratchett-esque spoof of the 2008 financial crisis set in a D&D adjacent universe. And that is the hook, that is what it is. But it has a lot more on its mind than just that simple concept sounds. Like, that sounds a little silly, and this is not a silly book. Some of the themes this book deals with are like discrimination, addiction, financial power and how it's used to abuse people, structural bigotry, colonialism, violence. The characters are very strongly drafted and very compelling. Yeah, it's a spoof, but it has a lot of anger and insight. And we don't get a lot of books these days that deal in allegory and really attacks structural social problems like this. And this book does, and I really like it. It's also a Spiffbo book, self-published, if I forgot to mention that up till this point. Number 12, by Blood by Salt. My favorite of the Spiffbo winners in the Tournament of Champions that I read this year. I read 6 of them. This is my favorite of the 6. Very narrowly edged out Orconomics. I went back and forth between Orconomics and this book a lot. This book I warmed to very slowly and then all at once. Like the first third, I was like, man, not much is happening. It's pretty deliberately paced. But it's so nuanced and so subtle and so careful in its examination of how people live under the auspices of institutional systems of racism. And that nuance and like delicateness and clarity really won me over by the end. You see this character that you're following along that just has to deal with like these constant compromises, subtlety in dealing with quote unquote superiors, how to survive in a racist caste system. At times you have to be very submissive. At other times you have to be very bold to protect yourself. And make yourself indispensable to the power structure. And it's a really timely book because, like there's so much institutional bias in our own social structures, our own power structures in our own society. And so many people are openly denying that and pretend like that doesn't exist. Some even claim the oppressors are the oppressed in our society. And this book is just a clear-eyed rebuttal of that sort of thinking and just really shows what it's like to live under bigotry. And as the book goes on, there's this feeling of doom that's just in every interaction, every social moment that really, really won me over. It's just a very smart book, a very thoughtful, emotional book, and I liked it a lot. Number 11, 100 Years of Solitude. I don't read a ton of classics, but I try to fit a few in here and there. And this is one I've tried multiple times in my life, and I've always bounced off it, and I've always not quite gotten it. This year, I insisted I was going to finish it no matter what, and just see what I thought at the end. And I'm glad I did, because once I got into it, I got into it. I thought it was really, really well crafted. I think if I had realized earlier that this book was actually quite funny, I would have gotten on its wavelength faster. Classical literature is often presented as this very serious topic, that you need to be very stern while you're reading. And no, I mean, this does have serious themes. It's dealing with colonialism and war through the exploits of this family that lives over, generations of time. But there's also moments of warmth, of satire, of humor, of even silliness, and absurdity that carry the reader through. And once I started finding and glomming onto those moments, I found this a very warm and exhilarating read. I'm glad I finally forced my way through the initial friction and discovered why this book was so beloved. Number 10, Discovery. What a book this was. This is by J.A.J. Minton, which is a pseudonym for the family behind the brilliant YouTube channel Talking Story, which is one of my favorite booktube channels. Absolutely love it. And this book was just a revelation. A cosmic horror is discovered under the ocean. The world is thrown into the chaos. Various people around the globe grapple with this fallout in different ways. Through media, through religion, through science, through violence, through technology. There's just so much going on. So many themes, so many ideas floating around this book. Elder gods roam. Deep alien horrors threaten. It's a really wild trip. It's anchored by really, really well-drafted characters. It reminded me a lot of The Overstory, which is another book I love, in that it took these disparate stories that feel like they're not connected in any meaningful way, and then weaved them together so that by the time the climax came, you're like, oh, this is all part of the same story. This is all going in the same direction. I love that trick. I haven't seen it too often. It's very showy writing. I'm glad I took a flyer on a YouTuber's book this year because it was a revelation for me. Number 9, Last Argument of Kings, the finale to the First Law trilogy. Everything in Joe Abercrombie's writing really clicked into place for me with this book. I had struggled a little bit with the first couple books of First Law. Like, they were good, but they didn't seem to amount to much. Like, the plotting was a little wonky for me. And they always get put in the same breath as like Lord of the Rings and Song of Ice and Fire and some of those series, and I didn't quite get that. But I think I get that now. Like, Last Argument of Kings really pulled me onto Abercrombie's wavelength fully, and I'm very excited to continue with the universe. Um, the prose is so crisp and so funny. Like, he's such a funny writer. The characters are so despicable, but like very lovable at the same time, even though they're monsters, like universally just awful people. Um, it's relentlessly cynical, but in a way that reads as wry rather than hopeless. Kind of a like gallows humory approach to grimdark. No good deed goes unpunished in this series. Nobody can escape the structures of violence that bind this really brutal society together. Say one thing about First Law. Say it's relentlessly engaging. You have to be realistic about these things. Number 8, Annihilation. Glad I finally got to this one. Not nearly as trippy as advertised, but a very fun voyage into a strange otherland. A lot more character driven than the movie, which is also quite good. Annihilation is a great use of science fiction as a lens to examine character. What happens to a person when they are put in a position where all their normal touchstones to reality are gone? It's also a very nice short read, which is good. After I've spent the last few years reading a lot of Sanderson, a lot of Jordan, a lot of Erickson, it was nice this year to fit some slimmer books into the mix. And I thought this was a good companion book to Piranesi as well, which I read a few years ago. Number 7, The Crippled God, the finale of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Look, I like slim books, but chonkers can be great too. Crippled God was a very satisfying conclusion to Malazan Book of the Fallen. It picked up a lot of the threads, not all the threads, but a lot of the threads of Dust of Dreams and carried them with aplomb. A little sad my boy Karsa got a little shafted in the narrative. I wanted more from him, but other than that, I thought it worked really well. And apparently Karsa gets his own trilogy at some point, so I'm ready to read that in the future. Erickson does this thing where he balances the bleakest pits of despair with hope and kindness and camaraderie. And it really does a good job of showing how, like, in the dark times, there's still light to be found. Horrors can be met with beauty and grace. And, given the times we live in, though, sometimes that message is desperately needed. Number 6, Pet Sematary. Dread. In one word, that's what Pet Sematary is. King considers this his most horrific book. And for a lot of good reasons. But the horror is not on the page necessarily, it's in the anticipation of what's to come. I think it was Hitchcock once said, you create suspense not by showing a bomb exploding, but by showing a bomb placed under a table, then showing a nice couple sitting down at the table for dinner. That's where suspense comes from. The audience knows the bomb is there, that the threat is real, but they can't do anything about it. And that is the trick Pet Sematary pulls. So much of this book is just like a charming slice of life of this very lovely family that I enjoyed spending time with. But the wrongness is coming. It's there. It's lurking in the shadows. It's lurking in the corners. Enough seeds are planted that you understand where it's all going to end. And boy, when it starts moving towards that conclusion, inevitably, I had to read some of these pages through my fingers. I was so terrified, like fraught with fear and anxiety. Yeah, this book was not okay. It really, really got to me. King is a master. Somehow, like, a little underrated, even though he's so popular. Number 5, The Spear Cut Through Water. Very formally daring book. Joy to read. I had a blast with this book. The mythological world building, the fun characters, the weirdness, the bizarreness, the structural, innovation, and really a frankly terrifying fantasy world that these characters are moving through. It's a little hard for me to put my finger on why this book was so great. It's inscrutable at times. It's mystical at other times. But if you get on its wavelength and really vibe with it, It's so good, and vibe is the word. Like it's a trip. You have to just let go and ride the ride. And if you're able to do that, I think you'll have a very, very good time with The Spirit Cuts Through Water. Number 4, Children of Time. I mean, it's spiders in space. What's not to love? I really, really enjoyed the intercutting between the colony of spiders and how Tchaikovsky thought about like how a spider society would evolve from hunter-gatherers to spacefarers, how it would evolve similarly to humans, how it would evolve differently from humans. Um, and then they intersperses it and intercuts it with these trials and tribulations of a human colony ship that is trying to find a new world to plant down on, and running into all their own problems in that process. Um, the parallels between the trials of the small community of humans on the spaceship and the larger society of spiders on the planet really worked. It felt like they were facing similar but different challenges at all times. It was really clever using the same names for different generations of spiders so that you feel like you're following the same characters, even though thousands of years have passed. It's just a creative, endlessly innovative, endlessly thoughtful book, and I love it. I loved it. Absolute genius. Number 3, The Traitor, Baru Kamarant. I think this book has the best twist I've ever read. I won't say more. I've read a lot of reviews of this book where people find it kind of cold and dehumanizing. But for me, that couldn't be further from the truth. Baru was instantly one of my favorite fantasy characters. An incredibly complicated and challenging protagonist with layer after layer after layer of things going on inside her personality and her brain and her motivations that were very difficult to decode and unpack. At times, an unreliable narrator. At many times, an unreliable narrator. I think some people bounce off her because she's a very intellectual person. Um, she's kind of a savant, but I didn't find that made her cold. I found that she had very deep feelings, had trouble expressing them, had trouble emoting them, but like the still currents ran deep for me in this book. And I found her a very emotionally overwhelming character as well as a very intellectual one. Um, and you know, it's also kind of cool, just like the innovation of like using financial systems as a plot device was really really unique to me and like really clever. I don't think this book's for everybody. A lot of people seem to have bounced it off of it, but I think it's very underrated, and I really recommend giving it a shot. And I'm very eager to keep reading the trilogy. I just thought it was a masterpiece. Number 2, Glorious Exploits. Speaking of masterpieces, oh my God, Glorious Exploits blew me away. It's set in Syracuse during the Peloponnesian War. On the surface is like this simple story of two men who are trying to put on a play and can only find Athenian prisoners to use as actors. But boy, things are more complicated than it seems. This book is so many things at once. I've rarely read a book that makes me feel more varied emotions than this book did. At times it was funny, it was sad, it was comic, it was tragic, it was uplifting, it was horrific. It made me laugh and cry and wonder and smile and cringe and all the things. This book's about finding joy in the dark places, about making meaning from tragedy, and about how the human spirit can conquer all, even when it's losing everything. I don't know. I can't say enough about this book. I want to shout out the Brothers Gwyn channel for recommending this one at the beginning of the year. I think it was on their best. It was their best book of last year, and yeah, it's just perfect. It's a perfect book. I love it. Somehow it's not number one, and that's only because there can only be one number one, and that number one is Orlando by Virginia Woolf. This is my new favorite book of all time. I love this book. It's so good. I had seen the film with Tilda Swinton a few years ago, and that made me immediately put this on my TBR. I'm so glad I finally tackled it. You simply are not allowed to write prose like this anymore. Probably for good reason. Like, I don't think a lot of people could succeed writing in this style. I don't think a lot of people would give it the patience that it earned at the time it was written. But Wolf is a master, and I was just swept away. Yeah, like there are some sentences in this book that go on for an entire page, and you're just like, wow, this is just one continuous thought. But that's the charm. It's very similar to like a Faulkner or a Joyce, who I also enjoy. This book's very transgressive for its time, at least. But I think even modern, like it's dealing with a lot of like gender bending concepts and sexuality. It's provocative. It's contemptuous of society, but also very funny and very amusing and very wry. Um, it felt like this very very interesting bridge between like the modernist writing generation and the beats, and had some of my favorite features of both generations of writers. Yeah, so my favorite book this year is not a fantasy novel. I mean, it's kind of a fantasy novel. It is a fantasy novel, but it's not a traditional fantasy novel. It's its own thing. Um, but it's a masterpiece. It's perfect. It's so well drafted. A little intimidating. The writing style is not going to work for everybody, but it really worked for me. And look, if the book seems too intimidating, the film is great. It's a good entry point into this concept at least. Um, yeah, that's my 2025 in reading. Thanks for following along. Please like and subscribe. And just to let you know a little bit about what's going on, I'm going to be rebranding the channel pretty soon, so look out for a video on that. I'm going to be trying to put more content out more regularly this year, as part of my push for publishing my second novel, which is going to come out halfway through the year probably. So keep an eye out for that. And of course, you can buy my first novel, The Quantum Entanglement. I think it's pretty neat. Thanks and happy reading.